So we're going weiter. We're continuing with Perek Yud in the Shelaima, which is some general ha'oras in Be'inyan Schar v'Einesh v'Gan Eden v'Gehenim. So, I think we're up to Vav. So again, remember, just as you already know, everything in the Shelaima is a likut of the Gra from other places. So the Gra did not write a sefer called Shelaima, but Rav Shmuel Malson and his son, who was a famous guy, Rav Yitzchak Malson, were malakate from all of the ksavim of the Gra, various inyanim and avodas Hashem. So that's why everything is from a Mishlei or Tikkunei Zayar or whatever it is. Most of the Shelaima is taka from Mishlei, and it'll tell you where in Mishlei. But here, from Mishlei Perek Vav, he brings an interesting klal, which is actually pashut if you think about it. Sechar ha-mitzvahs hi bilti tachlis, ugemul avainais hu betachlis. There's a nafkamina between sechar v'einesh. Sechar, you want the air conditioner? Sechar of mitzvahs has no gevul. Sechar of Olam Haba is nitzchias. You don't get Olam Haba like for an hour or for a day or for a year or for 100 years. So every mitzvah in which you have a chelik in Olam Haba is dacha nitzchias. Le'itach gisa, on the other side of it, gemul avainais hi betachlis. See, this is actually the hesber why, the Gemara says, Ein Aveira, it's a machlekes actually, but at least the way the Gra seems to paskin and the Rambam seems to paskin, Ein Aveira mechabe mitzvah. This means that I don't say if I have 100 mitzvahs and 100 aveiras, they cancel each other out and I'm a zero. But rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu maintains two separate cheshbainis. There's a cheshbon of aveiras, there's a cheshbon of mitzvahs. So when a person dies, HaKadosh Baruch Hu determines the cheshbon of aveiras, the cheshbon of mitzvahs. On the aveiras, there's a gehenim. And after gehenim is over, you're zeichet to Olam Haba mitzad the mitzvahs. In other words, two separate cheshbainis. I don't say HaKadosh Baruch Hu nets the aveiras and the mitzvahs. And the reason why it's not shaykh netting is gufa because of this reason. Because the sechar of a mitzvah is nitzchi, and the einish has a gevul. For example, b'derech klal we say gehenim. B'derech klal, gehenim is not more than 12 months, right? So memela, it's not shaykh for an aveira to take away from a mitzvah, because the aveira is only lizman, and the schar mitzvah is benitzchias. It's an interesting hara, which means like this. And the Rambam indeed says in Hilchos Tshuva that even if a person is a rasha, he has many, many more aveiros than mitzvahs. B'derech klal, a rasha has a chelik in Olam Haba, may not be a big chelik, but he has a chelik in Olam Haba after he's mashlim his din in Gehenim. Now then the Rambam goes on and says that kama v'kama situations you don't have a chelik in Olam Haba. So l'maisa, if you're a kaifer in the Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah, so l'maisa the Rambam learns unless you do tshuva, you don't have a chelik in Olam Haba, so that's for falid. But if a person is a maimin, but whatever, because of the Yetzer Hara, he's machal Shabbos, doesn't keep kosher, whatever it is. So the Rambam says he goes to Gehenim, and after he goes to Gehenim, so memela he goes Olam Haba. I don't say, in other words, the aveira is mechabe the mitzvah. And again, the svara for that is because the zechar mitzvah is bilti tachlis. There's no gevul. The einish of an aveira has a gevul. So that's this is the midah taiva of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the magnitude of how he's ma'anish is much less than the magnitude of how he gives a sechar. Okay, so that's again, if you think about it, l'chayre it's pashut because we say Gehenim is not more than Yud Beis Chodesh. That's why for Kaddish, right? Lamashal, Kaddish is supposed to bring the neshama of a parent out of Gehenim. So we only say Kaddish for 11 months because a person is not supposed to be machzik his parent as a Rasha. And taka shteit lahalacha, if chas v'shalom taka, the parent was Yadua to be a Rasha, one should taka say Kaddish for Yud Beis Chaydish. There is such a thing, Yud Beis Chaydish. That's it. I mean, but okay. But be it as it may, but this would be this far, yeah.
Okay, so I just understand, someone who's a kofar, or a different Nagdar that
Yeah.
defines,
Yeah.
his mitzvah, he never sees schar for that.
Oh, so that's going to be the question. So the question is this. The question is, that's a good question. So if a person is a kaifer, a person does all of those inyanim for which you don't give a chelik in Olam Haba. So what happens to his mitzvahs? The person did mitzvahs, right? The person did mitzvahs. The person was kind. He gave tzedakah. He cured cancer. He was gaimel chesed. So what's going to be the schar? He's ein lo chelik Olam Haba. So b'pashtus, some learn that according to the Rambam, he's going to get his schar in Olam Hazeh. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bedavke going to give him his schar in Olam Hazeh. Now, l'maisa, I have a shtickle kasha on that. Because like this. Normally, for kert, for a tzaddik, we would normally say he'll get his schar in Olam Haba. So what if a person is a Rasha? So the Eibishter gives him all sorts of beautiful things in Olam Hazeh. Because he's not going to get Olam Haba. But then he does tshuva. And he does tshuva and he gets mechilu slicha. And now he's zaycha to Olam Haba. So wait a second here. Does he lose a chelik in his Olam Haba because of the Olam Hazeh that Hashem gave him as a sechar on his mitzvahs when he was a Rasha? It's kind of an unfair deal because that would actually mean that the Baal Tshuva, by definition, is going to get less Olam Haba for the same mitzvahs than the tzaddik because he already got paid. That's almost fakert from Chazal's statement, B'makom shabali tshuva imdim, tzadikim gemurim einam yichaylim lamad ba. So that's a good cheshbon, meaning how does HaKadosh Baruch Hu recalibrate? In other words, if we, I mean Hashem knows, but if, we knew the guy is going to be a Rasha mitchila v'yad seif, so we'll pay him off in this world. Okay. But a person changes. So he gets paid off in this world. Memela, he then becomes a tzaddik. Memela, he's zeichet Olam Haba. But I can't give him all the Olam Haba because then he's getting more than the tzaddik, right? So I don't know. So I don't know how it's going to work. It's a good kasha. How does HaKadosh Baruch Hu recalibrate? But the pashtus says he'll get his sechar in Olam Hazeh. Now the Maisa, though, it's interesting. The Tiferet Yisrael Taka learns that there is a certain type of Olam Haba, not like the Rambam, that even a kaifer gets for the good that he's done. It's not the Olam Haba of Devekus the Shechina. In fact, it's almost like an Olam Hazeh Dika Olam Haba, that even when the neshama is separated from the guf, he'll get his pleasure, and that may have a gavul. That may have a gavul. A gavul, he'll enjoy. He'll have a all expense paid vacation on the Riviera for 2 years, and get paid off. Meaning the nitzchias is only the ruchnias Olam Haba of Devekus b'Shechina, but there may be kind of a different type of Olam Haba for kaifrim. Others learn. Rav Chaim learns. At least they paraphrase Rav Chaim Brisker. To taka say, a kaifer be'ikr gets no schar for anything, because he didn't do it to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, l'maisa, that's very, very schwer. Because even if you accept as a svara that if I don't believe in God, I can't get reward for serving God, but l'maisa, there's kfira in ikrim that are not the same as atheism. I mean, let's assume, for example, a person is maimin in Hashem, but he's kaifer b'tchias hamesim, or he's kaifer in a certain prat of Torah min hashamayim. There you can't really say the svara, he's not serving God. He's mechaben to serve God. And then another shita, a lot of different shitas, it's very mesubach, are mechalik between bein adam lamaka and bein adam l'chaveira. They taina an apikaires or a kaifer who puts on tefillin at his nephew's bar mitzvah to make the nephew happy, he gets no schar for tefillin, because in a bein adam lamaka, if you're a kaifer, it's garnished. But bein adam l'chaveira, I do tzedakah, I cure cancer. There has to be some reward, either in Olam Hazeh or maybe the other form of Olam Haba, because bein adam l'chaveira is bi'etzem, something good, even if it's not done l'shem avodas Hashem. So they want to be mechalek between a thing like Tefillin, saying Kriya Shema, which is only a ma'aseh tov if you're doing it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, versus a bein adam l'chaveira, which objectively has a certain atava. By the way, as a little aside, I mean, this was kind of Rav Shach's taina. Rav Shach had a big machlokes for the Lubavitch over many, many things. So he even tained on the Tefillin campaign, right? They stop you, and I don't know if you ever got stopped, but you know, actually here, right here, Chabad guy will put on Tefillin on people in the airports, right? This is called Mifsa Tefillin, right? The Tefillin project. So says Rav Shah, and the Rebbe justified it, because the Rebbe said, you find in the Gemara, there's a special category of Russia, which is called Paishe Yisrael B'Gufan. They sin with their guf, and the Gemara says that refers to a person, karkafta, a head, Zolai Manach Tefillin, who doesn't wear tefillin, and our girsa is karkafta Zolai Manach Tefillin Me'aylam. That if you were a person who never had tefillin, so there's a certain special chisaron in that madrega. So the Rebbe's argument is, even if you only put tefillin on somebody once, so they're yaitse from the klal of karkafta d'lei manach tefillin me'aylam. Right, so that's the justification. So number one, it can bring a person to tshuva, etc. You're mashchel, but number two, even if this is the only time the guy's going to do it, it's karkafta d'lei manach tefillin. So Rav Shach's taina was this. Rav Shach's taina was that if the guys who are putting on tefillin are kaifrim, then the tefillin doesn't count. So in fact, he even taina this as a bracha l'batola, because since they're not makayim any mitzvah by putting on tefillin, so he taina not only is it nothing, but it's taka bracha l'batola, because they cannot be kairis, a kaifer, who's makayim a mitzvah, the mitzvah doesn't count, at least if it's bein adam lamakim. That would at least be the svara. But one of the terutzim they give, which is actually different than what the Rebbe himself said, is it's lo gara me chinuch. Chinuch. I have a kid who's 12 years old. He's not mitzvah in tefillin, but I margil him. I habituate him to put on tefillin, because that will be a chinuch, that's a basis, that's a foundation for what he'll do when he becomes a gadol. Inyan of chinuch. And in chinuch, I can even make a bracha, because that's gufa, a chelik of the chinuch. Right, a chelik of being mechanech, my child, is I'm mechanech him in the bracha. So someone a time like this, I have a kaifer. I'm trying to be makarev the kaifer. So even if we say there's no kiyum of mitzvahs tefillin because he's a kaifer, it's not going to be worse than being machanech a katan. A katan also has no mitzvah. Elamai, I'm being margil him to know what to do when he does the mitzvah later. So since there's a chance, at least, a chance, that by starting this person off, he'll eventually come to the mitzvah. So even if he's a kaifer, the heter would be chinuch. Who says chinuch is only for a katan? Chinuch can be for a gadol too. Now, of course, you'd be technical. Well, is chinuch only chiyav on the father? Do I have a chiyav? I mean, I have a chiyav kira maybe, but do I have a chiyav to be machanech you? Oh, okay, you can down on that. But nevertheless, that would be the svara. That's an interesting svara. But the truth is, that's not the Rebbe's rationale, because the Rebbe had this idea that even if you're doing it once, that takes you out of the category of Paishe Yisrael B'Gufan. So on that, Rav Shachas Ataina, it doesn't. The guy's a kaifer, so it doesn't count. So you have to come up to another teretz, that it can lead to an eventual Kiyum HaMitzvah, so it works mitam b'chinuch. So that's really a separate teretz. That's not the same teretz as karkafta d'lei manach tefillin me'aylam. Okay. Alrighty. So all right. So that's ha'ora. So, but again, okay. I shouldn't really say this, but sometimes, it's the derech ha'olam, and maybe even among gedolim sometimes, that when you have a fundamental hisnagdus to somebody, everything they do becomes puzzle. I mean, Lamashal, one of the Rebbe's campaigns was Rambam. The Rambam is Kala Terakula, all of the halachas. So he created a thing where if you learn one parak of Mishnah Torah, one parak of Rambam a day, you finish in 3 years. It's not so pashut to do. 3 prakim, which is, it's pretty impossible. 3 prakim of Rambam a day. Because remember, 3 prakim of Rambam, it may not be so many pages, but 3 prakim of Rambam is like learning 50 dafim of Gemara, because all of the halachas are very concentrated. But if you do 3 prakim of Rambam a day, you finish Mishnah Torah in a year. So the Rebbe held that was a very good limud, because that way you learn the yesodais of Kol HaTorah. So Rav Shach didn't like that. Shach said, you're violating Minhag Yisrael. The Minhag Yisrael was Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi is from the 1920s. Also, it's not an old Minhag Yisrael. Because for sure you want to do your own thing. So sometimes you get the impression like, whatever Chabad comes up with, got to be puzzle, no matter what. But at least the Gabe Tefillin, I think Rav Shach does have an interesting taina, that there's no kiyum mitzvah on a kaifer, and you have to come on to chinuch. So it's an interesting shak of Ataria. And we have it even here. Listen, we have Talmidim who come to our Sameach, who maybe they're Tinuk Shenishpa, but they're technically kaifrim, right? They're not maimin in things, right? So once again, so people raise the question, how can they put on tefillin, how can they make brachas if they're not maminim? But the getter would be, this would be a getter of chinuch. You can do, a kaifer can do a mitzvah, mitam chinuch, and memela the chinuch would be that Amir Hashem they'll come to be maminim. Okay. So then we look at Zion. Sitra Achra. So Sitra Achra means the other side, and this is a term that's taken from the Zayar, and what exactly it means is a bit mystical and a bit mysterious, but it's the reality of Keiches Hatuma. Right? Pirkei Avos says already, a person, every time you do a mitzvah, you create a malach taif. You do an aveira, you create a malach ra. The malach ra is makatrek in Shemayim. The malach ra is a prosecutor against you. The malach taif is a melitz taif, right? So when a person dies, you have all these different malachim that are coming, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to don. In fact, the origin of mazikim, shedim, essentially are the keiches hara that are nivra through the chatoim of people. We create these mazikim. Now, just generally, just as a little digression here, because this is also Nogea the Gra. So the Bavli, the Yerushalmi much less, but the Bavli has dafim about mazikim. Maseches Brachas, it talks about mazikim, shedim. You don't go into a chorva, you don't go into an abandoned building. One of the reasons is because of mazikim. And it mentions that, it says in Vihinayam, in Tehillim, Yipayel mitzitcha elef, urvava biminacha. 1,000 will fall down from your side, from your left side, and 10,000 on your right side. So it's a reference to Hashem protecting you from Shadim. There's 1,000 on one side and 10,000 on the other side. And that's why it says, your begadim wear down on the knees. Why? Because the shadim are rubbing against your begadim. So in the Bavli, there's a lot about shadim or mazikim, which are synonymous. So people say, is there such a thing as demons? What's this thing about demons? So the Emma says there is a big machlekes. The Rambam Taka learns that there's no such thing as demons. What are demons? Demons are mishalim. They're mishalim for various things, but they don't refer, there's no thing that's called a demon that's real. And Chazal were using it for mishalim, for negative forces in the world, but it wouldn't be called demons. You can call, for example, you can call an earthquake a demon. You could call lightning a demon. You can call a tsunami a demon. But not that there's some personification that's a demon. The Gra writes in Yeridea, the Gra Yeridea, the Gra calls this kafira b'divrei Chazal. The Gra says, the Rambam was led astray by his preoccupation with philosophia ha'arura, the cursed Greek philosophy that everything has to make sense, everything has to be rational, everything has to be logical. And therefore the Rambam says there's no logical source for Shadim, so it has to be a mashal. But the Gra says it's a davar pashut. If Chazal say such a thing existed, then it's a davar pashut. In fact, this is the Rambam's mahalach generally, even with Piha Asain, with Bilam, the Chamor talking. The Rambam learns these are dreams, these are marais, these are prophetic visions a person has that Hashem wants to teach him a lesson. It's not that there was a physical donkey that spoke. This is B'derech Klal, the Rambam's mahalach. And the Gra says that this is because he was misled, and the Lashon is philosophia ha'arura, the cursed Greek philosophy. So somebody has to Kutzker Rebbe. It says, who's right, the Rambam or the Gra? So the Kutzker Rebbe said, it's a davar pashut, the Gra is right. The Gra says there are mazikim, Chazal say there are mazikim, Fishteitzach there are mazikim. But once the Rambam paskins, there's no such thing, so even the mazikim have to go like the Rambam, and therefore they disappear. They disappear because the Rambam paskin, they don't exist. But b'yetzem, they exist. Okay, so be it as it may, though, Fishteitzach in Kabbalah, in the Zayar, the inyan of Shadim is a very, very big inyan. It's a big inyan. And Sitra Achra refers to the kayches of Tumah that are created by the Averis of the people. But the MS is, the Sitra Achra also is part of the Ebershter's Bria. They also have to get their chiyas. Because Einoid Milvadai, nothing can exist in the world without HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving it life. So even the Kayches of Tumah have to get their chiyus from Hashem. It's not like, in Christianity, it's a complicated thing. They look at the Satan, they look at what they call the Antichrist. In other words, as if to say, there's another kayach that is misnaged against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not shaykh. It's not shaykh. Because that other kayach also has to get its chiyas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we don't look at Satan and Yetzer Hara and Sitra Achra and Shadim. We don't look at this as something that is independent from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It also is nivra mi'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the language it comes mi'acharayim. Again, this is just lashon b'nei adam. In other words, when Hashem creates something that He wants in the world, He creates it from the front. Like I'm looking at it and I make it. When it's something I really wouldn't want, but I have to have it, mi'acharayim, I create it from the back. So the lashon of the Zayar is that these inyanim are created mi'acharayim. They are not created in front of God, they are created from the back of Hashem. But nevertheless, they are created. And part of why they're created, and they're allowed to exist, and not only are they allowed to exist, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Makayim them, is because they facilitate Bechira in the world. Meaning, if you think about this, if there wouldn't be these kayches of Ra that lead a person astray, that create the taivas, that create the Yetzer Haras, that create the attractions to evil, then we would totally see the emes. If we totally saw the emes, we would, how could a person do any Aveira? There wouldn't be Bechira. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be a world where there's Bechira, there have to be kochos that are moshechas, that pull us towards the bad direction, even though they ultimately come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu themselves. So again, the lashon is Sitra Achra, the other side. And the Gra, who of course is Maimin and Shadim and Mazikim and the like, uses the lashon of Kabbalah, the Mekubalim, the Sitra Achra, in a lot of places. By the way, as a little aside, this is nothing to do with our Indian tonight, but I'll mention it. This is okay. It's Satmar a little bit. Rav Kook, who's still very controversial to this day. Rav Kook developed an idea that sometimes inyanim of kedusha have to come into the Welt in the levush, in the garment of the Sitra Achra. because he tells it like this. He says the Sitra Achra are kaichais that fight Kedusha. So when Kedusha comes into the world, they want to destroy it. It's like the immune system of the body, right? A germ comes into the body, the immune system makes milchama. So in the opposite way, the Sitra Achra makes a milchama against Kedusha. Now, the emes is, let me point out, let me give you a medical example. When a person, chas v'shalom, needs an organ transplant, you need a kidney transplant, you need a heart transplant, you need a liver transplant. I'm not going to go into the shilas, are you allowed to take it? But whatever, the person needs the organ. However you got it, that's a separate shaila. So the biggest risk of all organ transplantation is it triggers the body's rejection system because it's a foreign thing. And the same mechanism that the body will fight germs and bacteria and illness and everything else, the body will fight that heart, fight that liver, fight that kidney, and destroy. A person dies from the rejection. So, in order to enable the transplant, they have to kind of lower the strength of your rejection system. Now, without a rejection system, a person would die from a stam cold. Every cold you die. Every cold will kill you. Elamai, the body fights it. If you have to lower the rejection to be makabel, so that's why when they lower the rejection through drugs of transplant, they have to be mamish in a germ-free environment. They have to be in plastic. Nobody can visit them. Everything has to, you really have to have full masks, much more than COVID even, because chas v'shalom, a single cough from somebody could kill the person. So this creates kind of a dilemma, because if I don't give the anti-rejection drugs and the immune system is powerful, it's going to reject the heart. He'll die from that. If I give him the anti-rejection drugs that lower the immune system so it accepts the heart, he can die from a cold, he can die from anything. So one of the ways they try to get around this dilemma medically is keep the rejection system, but fool the rejection system into thinking this is part of the guy's body. So they can do some genetic modification in which the heart from the donor, they do some genetic manipulation, will be matim to the person's own genome, and memela it'll be makabel. In other words, you got to fool the immune system into thinking this is part of the guf and not something foreign, right? Quite literally. So, interestingly enough, histako b'yaraiso barei alma, Kadosh Baruch Hu looks into the Torah, and the whole world is a reflection of the Torah. In Ruchnius, it works the same way. Again, I'm basing this in Rav Kook, although Rav Kook does not say all of them mashalim. There were no heart transplants in Rav Kook's time. The time is the Sitra Achra is misnage to Kedusha. So whenever a new idea comes into the Welt that would create a lot of Kedusha, the Sitra Achra will attack it and try to undermine it with machlekes, with sinas chinam, all sorts of inyanim. Because it attacks Kedusha the way an immune system attacks that heart. So Rav Kook says, so how does it come into the world? It has to come into the world ki ilu. It's a bad thing. And therefore, it tricks the Sitra Achra to letting it in because it looks like a bad thing, just like the immune system can be tricked. And therefore, that's how it goes in under the radar. So Rav Kook tainet that secular Zionism was such was such a taifa'ah in the sense that Yishuv Eretz Yisrael was a chashuv inyan to build up Eretz Yisrael, Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, and it should have come into the Welt derech Kedusha. There were movements. Talmidei Hagra, Talmidei the Baal Shem Tov, but there were small movements. But there were movements doing it derech Kedusha. But the Sitra Achra is makalkel, the Sitra Achra is mavatel. So therefore, it comes into the world looking like it's a bad thing. That's a way of fooling the Sitra Achra, so it comes in under the radar. So Rav Kook's taina was, Amal, there could be beautiful inyanim that come in a lavush of Sitra Achra. But even Rav Kook is Maida. There's a tremendous sakana in these types of ideas, because this should be what's called the klipa. This is the outer shell. And ideally, once it comes in, we should throw away the outer shell and just look at the panemius. But what happens is we get so dabuk in the outer shell that we're kind of stuck with that. He even said, I believe, feminism was that way. Now, feminism in his time was an early thing, but he says, B'yetzem, the dignity, the shavius of a Bas Yisrael, men and women should be equal in dignity and respect in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's eyes. That's B'yetzem a good thing. That's a proper thing. It's a proper thing. One shouldn't treat, right, Chazal say, by a marriage, Ayava Kagufa, you love your wife the way you love yourself, Machabda, you give her kavod, Yaiser Megufa. Elamai, so we lived in a world of male oppression where women were oppressed. So feminism comes in, women's liberation, women can do everything men can do. Now in many, many ways, this is a very destructive idea, because it could lead to the breakup of families and women not wanting to get married, and right, so it has many bad things. But the shirish of the Nakuda is a good davar that gets niskalkel because it comes into the world through the Sitra Achra. So this is a dangerous idea, but it's a very, very interesting idea, that in the rishus can often be tamun, a garin, a kernel of a light that's an emistic light. What did they say? They say, I think the Ger Rebbe said. The Ger Rebbe says there were three things that we got robbed from. Maybe it's either the Beis Yisrael or the Yemrei Emes. He says we got robbed that Zionism was taken over by the Zionists, and that's a chaval. And we got robbed that Tshuva was taken over by the Balei Tshuva. He says it should belong to all of us. And I think maybe Tanakh was the third one. He says, and Nach was taken away from us from the Maskilim, because the Maskilim learned Nach because they weren't learning Gemara. So as a result, a normal Ben Torah never learns Nach, never learns Nevi'im, because it was taken over by the negative forces. But this is an idea where the Sitra Achra captures something, and it's hard to reclaim it in the Inyanim of Kedusha. So it's an interesting machshava. You can see why Rav Kook is a little controversial, because he's basically saying that sometimes even things that look like Averis Mamish, there might be something good in them. And in reality, again, this is actually based on Kabbalah too, because the emes is, if everything gets its chiyas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kulo taiv, then there has to be, even in the rishus, a bechina of taiv in there, because it comes from Hashem. Otherwise, if you say something doesn't come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then you're saying there are shtei rishuyas, right, which is not shaykh. In fact, that's the bracha of Yitzer Oru Borei Chayshech. Right, Chazal said in all tefillas, in Ma'ariv and in Shachris, you have to be maskir, midas yaim b'layla, midas layla b'yaim. So in the daytime, I got to mention that the Eibusher creates darkness as well as light, and at night, I got to mention he creates light as well as darkness. This is that you shouldn't think there are two Rishuyas, the God of light and the God of darkness. But the emes says light and darkness are also remazim to Taiv and Ra. And in fact, in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, Yitzer Or Ubayrei Chayshech, it actually says Yitzer Or Ubayrei Ra. That's what the pasuk says, Yitzer Or Ubayrei Ra. Chazal didn't want to use that lashon because Chas v'shalom, you don't call what Hashem does Ra. But on the other hand, that's what the pasuk says. But the emes says that's exactly right. That even in the Ra, it's chayshech, meaning the good is there, but it's dark. It's covered up. Biatzmusai, it is still a good thing. So these are deep ideas. But again, the sakana shebedavar is that we become aduk in the klipa, and therefore, instead of looking at it as the external garment that you then get rid of, we become davuk in the klipa, and then we're taken into very bad places. Okay, so this was Rav Kook's take on Zionism, on feminism, even on reform. Again, people will say Rav Kook is going too far. Really, it's not for us to judge. But he tainud that, Hasidus on some level could be called a reform movement. What's that, a reform movement? The word reform means I look at a certain situation and I see chesroinus in this situation. So I want to make a different situation to make it better. So Rav Kook said, people looked at the frum world and they saw superficiality. They saw people were doing mitzvahs out of rotes, mitzvahs anashim milumada. There was no enthusiasm, there was no geschmack, there was no commitment. They're just going through the motions mechanically. So they're moired, they rebel. So Hasidus was a revolutionary movement, we would say, al tzad ha'toiv, although the Gra had his nagdus to it, that, let's create, we're committed to Torah and mitzvahs, but with simcha, with islavus, with avas Hashem, with yiras Hashem. And reform is an example of something that may have had a shirish in kedusha too, but there was a dveikus in the klipa, meaning the reform. In other words, what causes me to reform is I look at the matzav and I see it's not good, but I can address it in the wrong way. So he says, Rav Kook said, when people were rejecting Yiddishkeit, in their panemius, there were reasons to reject certain things. But unfortunately, people attached themselves to the wrong solution. But Rav Kook saw in the rebelliousness, particularly of young people, not so much reform really, reform was middle age, but the young people who were becoming communists or socialists or Zionists, he saw that as a message that we have to have a greater hischadshus in panemius of Avodah. Okay, so you see the general orientation here, that even in the revolutionary anti-Torah movements, there was a nitzas of Kedusha. Again, I have to be careful with Torah anytime now. Things used to be private, now they're public, so I haven't learned how to adjust myself, and maybe that's something I need to do. But these are such interesting machshavas of how to look at matzavim that I think it's worthwhile to say. Now, the emes is Rav Tzadok, very much was kind of a contemporary of Rav Kook, a little older, went through a very similar mahalchim. And because of that, when Rav Tzadok's ksavim were printed after his death, there were a number of paragraphs that talk about these inyanim that were taken out. The mishpacha did not print. They were censored. Only later, in the newer editions, they found the original manuscripts. They put things out. They put them back in. But that's why if you have an earlier edition of Tzidkas Tzaddik or the like, there'll be a number of paragraphs that are not in the Tzidkas Tzaddik. And they focus on these inyanim. These inyanim, how in the Ra is Tomun, a taif, that it's shayach to extract. And the raya to this is Malchus Beis David. Let's look at the union of Mashiach. Now, Mashiach is, of course, Mizera David, but when you examine the yichus of Mashiach, it's kilkel after kilkel after kilkel. Number one, David HaMelech comes from Rus HaMoaviyah. Rus HaMoaviyah ultimately comes from light, having incest with his two daughters. Right? So Mashiach comes from a shirish of incest, of znus. And then Mitzad David's father, so you go back to Yehuda v'Tamar, in which Yehuda thinks he's with a Zaina, with a prostitute, etc. And in fact, Tamar was going to be burnt, and so she would rather go to Kivshin Ha'esh than embarrass Yehuda. But eventually, Tzadka Mimeni, he admits, etc. So you have light, and you have Yehuda v'Tamar, and then David HaMelech himself. You have David and Bathsheba. Yeah, Chazal say anyone that says that David committed adultery with Bathsheba is making a mistake. There was a get, etc. All the technicalities are there, but l'maisa, it looks like a chait, and it's described by the Navi as a chait. And Shelaima HaMelech comes from Bathsheba. Shlomo HaMelech comes from that pagam. And then there's a medrash by Yishai, which is quite an amazing medrash. Amazing medrash. The medrash says, what does it say? It says that Shmuel comes to Yishai, and he says, bring all your sons here. One of your sons is going to be king. And Yishai brings 7 of his sons. And Shmuel looks at every son and says, this is not the one that Hashem chose. He then asks Yishai, do you have anybody else? So Yishai says, yeah, I got a son that's a shepherd in the field there. He says, bring him. He brings him. That was David HaMelech, who was the youngest son, who was Nimshach L'Malchus. So the question is very obvious. Shmuel HaNavi tells Yishai, bring me all your sons. So Yishai only brings 7? Why? How could he not bring David l'chatchila? What, he thinks David is not right? Whatever it is, the Navi said, bring me all of your sons. How is it shaykh? So Shteit in Medrash, until that moment, Yishai did not know that David was his son. This is amazing. Yishai thought that David was a mamzer, that his wife conceived from another man. What's the pshat? So it says that Yishai is, of course, the grandson of Rus HaMoaviyah. Right? Rus and Bayes had Oved had Yishai. Right? Now, the Torah says, based on actually this parsha, the Torah says it in Kiseitze, Lo Yavai Amayni Amayavi B'Kal Hashem. You're not allowed to marry people from the nation of Ammon and Moav because they cursed, they hired Bilam, etc. So l'chayra, how could Rus HaMoaviyah marry Bayaz? There's an isser of Amayni and Moav. That means even if they convert, it doesn't mean you can't marry them as goyim. You can't marry any goyim. It means even if they convert, you can't marry them. So what's the drasha? The drasha is that this isser only applies to the males, Moavi v'lo Moavis, Amayni v'lo Amaynis. And the reason is because the whole taina is they didn't give you food and water. It's darka shel ish l'kadem. Right? A man brings forth water, a woman doesn't do that. Okay, Beseder. But that wasn't a meforsim dika halacha. That's why in Bayez's time, people were tining on him. That's why you'll remember the closer relative, Pliny Almaini, didn't want to marry Rus, he said, and Rashi says, he made a mistake. That there's an Isser even of Amaynis, or Moavis. And in David HaMelech's lifetime, there were people, Dayek HaAdaimi, said David is puzzle, Lavai Bikal, because he comes from Rus HaMoaviyah. So, here's what the Medrash tells us. The Medrash tells us, Yishai, who was a tzaddik gomer, the Gemara in Bava Basra says, Yishai was one of the few people, 4 people, who never did a chait. Never did a chait. Yishai, towards the Seif Yamav, began to be chayshesh, that maybe he's not allowed to be with his wife because he is from Rus HaMoaviyah. So he was peiresh miyishtei. But he paskin on himself, he's allowed to be with a shivcha kenainis, because since he's puzzle lavai b'kal, he's not allowed to marry a regular Jewess. Just like a mamzer could marry a Gyaris, a mamzer could marry a Shifcha. So he felt, as a Mayavi, he could live with a Shifcha Kenaitis. So he was Peiresh Me'ishtei, and he decided to live with a Shifcha Kenaitis. His wife, it's like Yehuda B'Tamar again, his wife convinces the Shifcha to change places. So Yishai thinks he's with the Shifcha, he's actually with his wife. When he sees his wife pregnant, Mamash Yehuda and Tamar, he doesn't think it's from him because he was with the Shifcha. So he thinks. He thinks she was Mazana. If she was Mazana, the kid that's born is a mamzer. So Yishai adopted him, Yishai raised him. But David is 28 years old. He's not a little boy at this point. But for 28 years, Yishai thought his wife was Mazana, and David is a mamzer. Now the Medrash says that David's mother told him he wasn't, etc. But for whatever reason, the story was secret. I can't say I understand the family dynamics here, but the story was secret. And that's why David HaMelech is always rejected by his brothers. Even Masu Habaynim, the stone that the builders reject. Haisel Reish Pina, the Medrash says it's going on all the zilzulim that David HaMelech faces. He's a mamzer, a child of Zanus. And I don't know how that affected their relationship to their mother, all of these inyanim, etc. And that's why Yishai didn't bring him in until Shmuel said, there's one more son. And that is when Yishai discovered that David was his son, and he was with his wife rather than a shivcha. And that's the pasuk, Even Masu Habaynim. Even, the stone, or the ben, the son that was rejected. Even Masu Habaynim is Ben Shemasu Habanim. Chazal have a drasha. Haisel Reish Pina. Okay, so what does all this show? What this is showing is that the whole shalshelis of Malchus Beis David is mechusa in things that look like Averis. Whether it's Lot with his two daughters, whether it's Yehuda v'Tamar, whether it's David and Bathsheba, whether it's Yishai and his wife, and Rusa Moaviyah Bichlal, where people said that there's a psul because of David is from Rusa Moaviyah. That's a pretty bad yichus. You'd figure a Mashiach should come from the purest of the pure, the best of the best. But it comes from all of these inyanim. And indeed, the Gemara in Yuma has a lashon that a person is not nichnas l'malchus until they have kupa shel shiratzim. Now, literally, that means a bag of rodents. In English, we would call it skeletons in your closet. That for carrot, you have to have all of these chesreinas to be zeicha to malchus. We would think the opposite. So one of the explanations, Taka, is that the inyan of Mashiach is such an aliyah of Kedusha that the sheirish of Mashiach has to enter the world through the appearance of Ra. And that way you fool the Sitra Achra. This is based on a Zayir. So Rav Kook's Yisait is actually based on a Zayir that talks about fooling. This is what the Mekubalim call Sheichad L'Satan, if you remember. The Sar HaMishtaleach, without fully understanding it. The scapegoat. So, of all of the Korbanos, all of the Avodah on Yom Kippur, the most powerful atonement for Klal Yisrael is not the Ketores and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, not the blood of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The holiest place in the world, the Kayin Gadol goes in only on Yom Kippur. The greatest kapara for Klal Yisrael is not even in the Mikdash. It's the scapegoat that's taken out into the desert, and you push it over a cliff, and when it dies, that creates the red string in the Mikdash turns white when we're Zeicha, and that creates a kaparas aveinas for Klal Yisrael. The Kohen Gadol puts all the aveiras of Klal Yisrael on the Sarah Mishtaleah. I mean, it's not even clear. The lashon of korban is not even correct. The Sarah Mishtaleah is not even a korban because there's no aveidah in the Mikdash with the Sarah Mishtaleah. But you don't even need a Kohen, by the way. I mean, the person who was Melech, the Sarah Mishtaleah, was a Yisrael. Right? Everything on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol has to do. This is even Yisrael does. So the Ramban says, Sarah Mishtaleach is a side, but he says one of the meanings is it's a sheichad l'satan. Because literally, see, it's interesting how the lashon of the Torah is different than the lashon Chazal. Just like Chazal changed Yitzer or uvayrei ra to Yitzer or uvayrei chayshech, they did a similar nekuda in how you refer to the scapegoat. The Torah calls the scapegoat So'ir la'azozel. The Mishnah was Meshana the Lashon that instead of calling it So'ir la'azozel, you call it So'ir ha'mishtaleach. Now, So'ir ha'mishtaleach is a very powerful term. The goat that you send to the desert. Okay, Seder, that's what you do. So'ir la'azozel is a much trickier term. Azazel are the demons, the shadim, that frequent deserts and desolate places. So literally, taich, literal taich. Sorry, mishtaleach, the goat that you give, lazazel, the goat that you give to the demons. So Chazal didn't want to be mishtamish with that lashon, because chas v'shalom, it sounds like you're bringing a korban to Avodah Zarah. What? On Yom Kippur, I bring a goat to the demons of the desert. Right? But once again, Chazal didn't want to use that lashon, but Lamaisa, the Torah does use that lashon. So what does the Torah mean? So the Ramban writes, this is a sod, but he says it is ka'an, similar to a sheichat, a bribe that you pay the Satan. So the Satan should not be mekatreg, should not go up to Shemayim and prosecute and accuse Am Yisrael. And it gives, the Zayar gives a mashal. Let's say you want to come to a king, and because you want to, right, and it's hard to get to the king has vicious watchdogs, dogs that are going to attack you. So burglars know this. So you carry a piece of raw meat in your pocket. So when the dogs attack you, you throw them the meat. They run after the meat. They'll leave you alone. Burglars do this. Burglars actually have raw steak. Now the emphasis: a good trained watchdog, doesn't have hesach hadas, but most dogs are not that trained in that way. So they'll go after the meat. So Mamela, the Ramban says on Yom Kippur, the Sitra Achra is maineya our tefillas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we give a sheichad l'satan in order that we distract the Satan with the gift that we give him. Memela, he's not going to block us. Once again, it's hard to understand, and I'm not going to explain it either, and I don't understand it. But it fits this idea of mahalach that sometimes great kedusha has to come through a guise of something that looks not min hayesher. That's the bechina v'sheichad l'satan, and that's to prevent the Sitra Achra from being mekatreg in all sorts of ways. Okay, so this was a long digression, stamazay, on the inyan of what is the Sitra Achra and its role in Ruchnius. So now we'll just read a few lines of the Gra here. And he says, the Sitra Achra mitchila nires laiki ayhev. Initially, these kaiches of Ra do not come to you as hostile people, hostile entities that hate you. They come to you as friends. Meaning, not to be, they don't say, be machal Shabbos, violate the Torah. They say, you need a break. You'll learn better if you do this and you do this. Meaning it comes to you as a friend. It doesn't come to tell you, be a kaifer. It comes in the guise of friendship. But hapesi, halech achareh kol yamav. And a foolish person will follow this. It sounds good. Eat, drink, relax. Don't be nervous. Don't be anxious. Because after all, it's not good to be nervous. Not good to be anxious. Menuchas hanefesh. So a person thinks they're doing everything right. But kasherhu yoredas nitol nishmasei. But at the end of your life, because Chazal say the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, and the Malach HaMavet are all one thing. So this kayach that was supposedly my friend now comes to claim my soul. So I see a familiar friend. I say, Shalom Aleichem, good to see you. All of a sudden, he's not my friend anymore. It's kind of a picture. All of a sudden, he's now here to exact the punishment, the misa, the einish. Asu Saiver, Shabbos Achshav Gamkein Lamalei Tavase. At the moment of death, the person says, my old friend, the Sitra Achra, is here. He will help me. He will give me the pleasures that I want in life. But he hafechas lo eiref umamisa eisai. The very thing that you thought was your good buddy will be the kayach that will be meimis you. So difficult. Now, this is taka very, very difficult because, it's not always coming from the Sitra Achra. I mean, sometimes the call that tells you to rest is taka good. I mean, there's a famous word from the Chafetz Chaim. I've mentioned it more than once. We say in Ma'ariv, "V'hoser satan milfanenu u'miacharenu." Take away the satan from in front of me and from in back of me. So the Chafetz Chaim asks, I understand the satan in front of me. I want to do a mitzvah. I want to go to the Beis HaMedrash. I want to learn. I want to be Gaimel Chesed. I want to go to shul early, Vasikin. So the satan is convincing me not to do it. Sleep more, do this more. So that's the satan that's in front of me. That's maineya me from doing mitzvahs. But what's the satan in back of me? I'm already past him. Right? What's the satan in back of me? So there's a famous word. The Chafetz Chaim says, the satan in back of you is pushing you to go to the Beis HaMedrash. Let's say, remember, it's Yadua that the Chafetz Chaim was very, very makbid, that his Talmidim would not learn very late into the night. He used to come into the Beis Medrash at midnight. He would close all the lights and kick everybody out. He said, you're mechuyev to sleep, because he said, Amal, a person has a Yetzer Hara. I want to kill myself. I want to stay up till 5 in the morning, not eat, not sleep. And what's going to happen, and the Yetzer Hara will encourage you to do that, because what's going to happen eventually is you'll destroy your health, and then you'll do nothing. And the emes is, the Chafetz Chaim himself experienced this as a teenager. He writes that he got very sick. It's not clear what it was. And he says for a whole year, he did not learn Gemara. He writes as if he learned nothing at all. My guess is he probably may have learned Chumash. He probably did something, but he said he could not concentrate for a whole year. Because of that, his whole life, he became very, very, very sensitive to the notion that sometimes there's a Yetzer Hara that pushes you so much that it destroys you. So the Chafetz Chaim says, there's a satan in front of me that stops me from doing mitzvahs, and there's a satan in back of me that pushes me to do mitzvahs, because the satan knows in the long run it's going to destroy me. So this makes this extraordinarily complicated, you see, because sometimes it's the Sitra Achra that's saying, relax, take it easy, and sometimes fakert. It's the Sitra Achra that says, don't relax, keep on going. Put your feet in cold water, as the Gra himself, learned. He used to put his feet in ice cold water to keep himself awake. So this makes life very hard. How do I know if I'm hearing it from the side of Kedusha or I'm hearing it from the side of Tuma? Either message, learn more, take a break. Either of those messages could come from the Sitra Achra, or it could come outside HaKedusha. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to know. A person has to be very honest. That's why I say Harav is nichlal in this, why a person needs a Rebbe. Needs a Rebbe not only because the Rebbe is greater than you, which is usually true, but because you're a nogeya b'dover. When it comes to yourself, you can't always make a judgment. You need, in fact, even a chaver can help you. You need somebody outside of yourself. I'll just end with the famous ma'aser with the shach. The shach, Reb Shabsai HaKohen, was a phenomenal guy. Phenomenal. He was nifter very young, nifter in his early 40s. A meshudnik guy. In fact, they say the shach and Rabbi Akiva Eiger were the last gedolim who knew like every sefer. In other words, I guess even the Gra, right? The Gra, of course, knew Kol HaTorah Kula, but the Gra did not make it his business to read every Achron that ever. The Gra made his own Achrais. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger and the Shach, they say they knew like every sefer. Of course, there were much fewer Sforim than today already, but they knew every sefer. They knew like everything that was written. Every Achron, every Rishon, everything. So the Shach was a phenomenal guy, but the Maisa goes that he once had a din Torah against somebody. He felt that somebody owed him money, The Shach took him to Beis Din. And the Shach, of course, you would not want to be sued by the Shach. I mean, the Shach was, I mean, he knew Kala Terakula, but Choshen Mishpat was his forte. Choshen Mishpat was Badafka, the Shach's greatest miktsaya. So the Shach is giving all of the arguments, all of the tinus, all of the reasons why he's right, all of the reasons why he's entitled to the money, and of course, the other guy had like nothing to say, really. So the Beis Din said, "Okay, we hear you. Just give us a night to think about this." So the next day they come in, and they paskin not like the Shach. So the Shach can't believe it. He says, "I gave you all of these tinus, all of these rayas. How could you not paskin like me? The din is pashut." So they said, "You're right. Avada, yesterday you convinced us 100% that you're right. But we came across this new parish in Choshen Mishpat. And we went through the new parish, and he gave us a whole new mahalach in the Mechaber and in the Shita Rishonim. And he slugged up all of the rayas that you had, and it convinced us, Taka, that you were making a mistake, even though it looked like you were right." That new sefer was none other than the Shach on Choshen Mishpat. It says, and they basically said, "We read your words, and you slugged up your own taina." The Shach used to tell the story. The Shach used to say, "You see the kayach of Negias. Negias, when it's Negea you, then you're going to see all of those things that are crumb." And people sometimes ask me, am I saying Lashon Hara on the Shach by telling such a story? What's my heter? But the answer is the Shach told the stories in the middle of the Shach. Gave us Rishus to be Megala the Maisa. So in Avodas Hashem, it's really very much the same thing. You know, we come to certain conclusions, but how do we know if it's coming from the Yetzer Hara or the Yetzer Tov? So that's why you need to have a chaver outside of you that can, see it in a more objective way, right? So it's very, very difficult. So the Gra says, we're pesi. The word pesi, fool, comes from the word to be enticed. Gullible. Nayach lehispates. You're easily convinced. Das heißt the pesi. And we're pesayim. We're easily convinced by whatever we feel at any given moment. And that's the great challenge of life. Very, very difficult challenge. What's coming from the Sitra Achra, what's coming from the side of Kedusha. Sometimes the side of Kedusha says, take a break. And other times it's the Sitra Achra that's telling you to take a break. So how do you know, right? So these are things to think about. Okay, have a good Shabbos. And,